Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and yeah, you guessed it, we talked about the Empire, we talked about the Dwarfs, so it only makes sense that we talk about Nurgle, the last faction that's going to get some attention in Thrones of Decay, the DLC that we're expecting around December. Now this one's fairly important to me, mostly because we're expecting Tamurkhan and that's a character that I very much admire, but not only that, look, let's be honest, Nurgle launched at the worst state when it comes to Warhammer 3, and there have been no real fixes for him just yet. Now, obviously, we can all expect Tamurkhan, if it ends up being Tamurkhan, playing completely different to Kugath, but we also have to look at the fact that, Kugath is not a fun faction. Base game Nurgle needs a little bit of attention. So with this video, I'm going to do the usual. I'm going to throw out some ideas. I'm not claiming that I know better than Creative Assembly. I'm just throwing some ideas in case they might need them. Again, it's just trying to look on the positive side of everything that's happened recently. More communication will probably be better, and maybe they just need a few ideas here and there. You guys might have some better ones, so if you do, put them in the comments below. The devs do watch these videos, so yeah, together, let's hope we can get a better thing for Nurgle. And finally, remember, I'm talking about like the free patch stuff here, so the fixes, not necessarily new units, new items or whatever, just fixing up the problems here. So first things first, I hope Creative Assembly don't actually change Kugath's start position. Yes, I know some people don't like it, but it's incredibly lore-friendly. The problem here is actually more mechanical than it is where the start is. Yes, there's a bunch of reasons why, but even just using a faction mover mod, it proves that the problem is the faction itself, not where he starts. Yes, he does get a lot more benefits for being in the Chaos Wasteland, but a cheap fix is not a proper fix. Alright, so we're going to talk about the tech tree here. So it's not bad for what it is. It's relatively small in all honesty, so it doesn't actually provide as many bonuses. There should be more. The problem with the tech tree is at the beginning you have the bonuses towards growth, which are quite small, but kind of noticeable depending on how you're playing, and then you do have some extra growth, but that's for Chaotic Wasteland, which your faction is nowhere near at. So there's some other bonuses for growth with frozen climate and mountains and so on, but they're so far down the line in that tech tree that you're not really going to notice it until much later on. By that point you've already taken over the Mountains of Morn, and you're not really dealing with that many mountains after that anyway. So definitely what needs to be done for base game Nurgle is a proper rebalance of the tech tree. Not like, say for example, Kislev had, which was so minuscule it mostly went unnoticed, but literally fixing every single section to actually be decent. The lack of proper bonuses to your economy and just literally growth and stuff like that makes this faction a terrible slog to play, and I honestly try to avoid it as much as possible, especially since you're dealing with factions that have better bonuses and it's very noticeable. Okay, so we need to talk about construction now, because I really like this feature. I think it's extremely unique and it obviously fits very well with Nurgle. However, it was done kind of badly. So for those who haven't played Nurgle yet, because you've seen like the forums and Reddit and so on just telling people not to play it for obvious reasons, you build your building, right? Any of the ones at the very bottom, and over a period of turns, they will cycle through, granting you units to be able to summon. This will give you other bonuses too, like say for example, extra growth, extra control. All of them will get better and then worse as they cycle through the motion. The problem here is a number of things. First up, the buildings are way too expensive. An infrastructure building will cost you 2,000. A basic military building will cost you 5,000, and an advanced military building will cost you 10,000. So as you're building up an empire, that's a lot of money to put in. Yes, some other factions do have them in quite an expensive way, and obviously you're just paying for this once, whereas other factions do need to eventually get there by, upgrading buildings and so on. It's just a lot of money to drop at the very beginning with very little reward. Now, I'm not saying to reduce the price of the base buildings, because really, I feel like the price is fine. The problem is that you're mostly going to be building infrastructure buildings, and that means that you're stuck with Nurglings, Nurglings, and Nurglings. Again, you might say, well, that's fine for Kugath, but if other Nurgle factions get implemented that are going to play in the exact same way, well, they're going to be stuck with Nurglings too, and they're not going to have all the powerful bonuses that Kugath has for Nurglings. The infrastructure buildings should actually go from Nurglings to Plague Bearers, not just Nurglings and only Nurglings. This will make it a little bit less of a slog, and you will actually have a few better troops in your armies, because I've taken over the world with literally only Nurglings before, because they're the ones that you're going to have the most, and it just isn't fun, let's be honest there. Buildings in general need to have a faster tick-through rate, so it's usually around 4 turns, and there are some circumstances that you can reduce it to 3, but it should naturally be 3, being able to be reduced to 2. You might be saying that's a bit too powerful, but keep in mind that the Nurgle units themselves are very expensive to recruit. So let's use an example. To get a Great Unclean One, you're going to need to wait at least 20 turns after purchasing this building, and that's only for one. You can't recruit as many as you want, and even then, the Great Unclean One is fairly expensive. If you reduce it down to 3, it'll only take 15 turns. Yes, it's not a massive radical change, but it is 25% less, which means that you'll get them 25% faster. This will also mean that you're recruiting the other units 25% faster too. Again, not true recruitment, they're just going to be in your summoning pool, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the idea is you're going to have access to units and more varied units much quicker, and you're not going to be stuck with just Nurglings once again. I honestly think that something like this would benefit Nurgle's faction a lot more, and keep the player engaged more and incentivized to go and take over more locations to build up more of an economy, so that way you can say, oh, I've got these Exalted Plague Bearers waiting, why not start getting to them now? Whilst we're at it, the garrisons really need to improve for Nurgle. I mean, I understand that every faction kind of needs a better improvement here, but it's very noticeable for Nurgle, as first up, they don't get minor or major settlements, so you're kind of stuck fighting here. It's kind of silly, considering that even Nurgle would take over castles and so on. And your main form of garrison building is either the provincial capital or your settlement capital, and your infrastructure buildings, which, by the way, more Nurglings. Nobody wants that. Please, that needs to be fixed up, or else it's just going to cause way too many problems, especially as more and more factions are coming into effect. I mean, I started noticing it with the very, very strong Chaos Dwarves. You know, they're doing a lot of fire damage, and it does a lot to the Nurgle faction. It needs to be improved to be able to protect yourself a little bit better, because where you are in campaign means that you're surrounded by enemies. So if I decide to expand into Cafe, the ogres from the Mountains of Morn will come down, Imric will declare war on me, and he's got a lot of fire damage, the Chaos Dwarves kind of do that too. You're surrounded by enemies, and you can't really defend yourself without a proper garrison. I wouldn't say add in another building, you are kind of stuck with what buildings that you have access to, but improve upon them, right? And not by the means of cycling. Cycling doesn't really improve anything. It makes you stronger and defendable for like a turn or two, and then it's gone. Alright, so now we have to talk about the armies. You see, when you play as Nurgle, you don't recruit in the usual sense. You actually have to summon in your troops, which means that it's going to be a bit more expensive, and not only that, but the units actually arrive kind of damaged, which, let's be honest, kind of sucks. However, it's kind of thematic, and it does make sense with demon and summoning, even though you're summoning in mortals too. What needs to be done here, and I'm sure a lot of you will agree, is they have to take off the restriction of not being able to summon units when not in your area. So if you're in an enemy territory, you should be able to summon in too. Again, it's a summoning ritual. It can happen anywhere. I think it'll make it better for the Nurgle player if you're able to summon in as you're advancing, as that means that you don't have to slow down as much. You might have to slow down in terms of, well, you know, replenishment and so on, but when you're open, when you're able to just keep pushing and summoning in troops, given how expensive they are too, you should be able to summon them in anywhere. It'll also be kind of beneficial to you because, say for example, you're invading Grand Cafe and you've lost a battle, you'll need to replenish. Even if your troops are going to be weaker, it's better to have weaker units that you've paid a fair amount of money on than not having anything at all. So we're going to talk about Unholy manifestations now, and this is going to be a bit different because it's not just linked to Nurgle, it needs to be done for all the Chaos factions. They need to kind of like update them a little bit. For example, right, Pestilent Growth. It gives you casualty replenishment plus 20% for the local province, but disables your movement for 2 turns, which is why. What it should do is, again, replenishment rate, which is always really good, and increase growth of the province itself too. That means that you can start upgrading your buildings more and get some more benefits from it. No disabling of movement, it's just kind of silly. The fact that you need to get more Nurgle corruption spread over, or corruption of your certain Chaos God, to be able to even have access to these, you should imagine that they should be better, right? It's something that I do see kind of annoying. The other one, again, Blessing of Nurgle. Extra chance of plague spreading in the local province for 30%, and disable movement. Why disable movement? There is no reason why a blessing from a god is going to disable movement to your army, and it just is ridiculous on how that comes into effect. There's some really good ones afterwards, right? So experimental growth, it gives you a bunch of growth per turn and obviously reduces your recruitment cost. And then there's the one that just spreads plague everywhere. But they are so down the line, you'll likely either forgotten that this mechanic exists, or you just don't have enough corruption. This is why the first two need to be lucrative enough to be able to remember that. The one for Skarbrand, for example, summons in an army that you can fight, which gives you extra movement, and obviously gets you extra skulls. Every faction needs to have a really good first one and not disable movement. It makes you not want to use it and then makes you forget about it. Okay, now we're going to talk about cults. And again, this is not just for the base game Nurgle faction, but pretty much all the Chaos factions that have access to cults. We've seen that the Changeling has amazing cults. Now, I'm not saying that we should have that, but basically, rather than have only bonuses available if like a lord is present or there's a certain amount of growth, just have flat bonuses, right? I mean, in a perfect world, it would be as fleshed out as a Skaven Undercity, just providing loads of bonuses here and there, discoverability being used. But it does seem that Creative Assembly just want to make the base game factions have flat bonuses. So yeah, just flat bonuses. No certain prerequisites and stuff like that, just bonuses. Especially as cults aren't really that common. You've got to keep this in mind. I mean, this is turn 13, I've got 1. Usually cults will spawn in levels of high corruption for your chosen Chaos God. The problem is that usually those other factions spreading that corruption will die out. So they will form cults mostly around the areas where you are. The issue is that those cults will not last that long as they're areas that you're likely going to try and take over, so flat bonuses will be better off, because if they're going to last for a little amount of time, they might as well provide benefits all around. I don't have anything to complain about the plague mechanics. I actually quite like them when they work. Sometimes they don't. I know there's been some issues now where some plagues aren't actually giving the benefits that they say they do, but once they work, I feel they build perfectly fine. Yeah, I mean, I don't have all the answers. I don't claim I don't have all the answers, but I really want to see Nurgle brought up to speed, because while Skarbrand has issues, say for example with Khorne, Slaanesh and Tzeentch are perfectly fine, and Skarbrand's issues are very, very minimal compared to Nurgle. We need to see a bit of a fix, especially with Thrones of Decay coming up. I really am hopeful that Creative Assembly are going to be listening, as obviously none of us want a repeat scenario of what's happened with Shadows of Change. I'm choosing to keep optimistic because they must be aware now, I'm talking about management here, that they can't really do that again. The game will practically die, and as much as management might have hope in other titles kind of succeeding it, it's not going to be the case. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, I just want the Nurgle base game faction to be fun to play so people can enjoy it. I might not be the biggest fan of Nurgle myself, this is very obvious, but I know a lot of people who are, and it's a bit of a shame when they don't want to play the faction that they've been waiting for the longest time. Hopefully the patch is good, and yeah, just throwing some ideas. You guys might have better ones, put them in the comments below. Like I've said, Creative Assembly staff do watch these videos, they have told me, and hopefully something cool happens for Nurgle. Have a great day, guys. I'll see you all again very, very soon. I'm off to paint some orcs.